Hey guys, how's it going? So, we are talking about faithful finances, and today we're talking about the present, ruling in real. All right. So, basically, I had graduated. I was a doctor. I had just finished medical school. Everything was going great. And as we got ready to start internship, we got a handout that said something like, "You have been practicing delayed gratification for years. You've been putting in so much hard work and effort all these years. It's time to finally live like a doctor and use those finances," right? Something like that. It was like, reward yourself for all your hard work. And so, I mean, honestly, being a student for the past 8 years, kind of living off of way too much ramen, right? Like it was finally officially over. It was finally going to get a paycheck. But living like a doctor went out the window pretty quickly. Okay. A series of unfortunate events kind of ended that whole plan. So essentially, I had a serious infection. It landed me in the hospital for a couple of weeks. So, on top of my medical school loans, I was handed all of these medical bills, and then I was pulled off work. So, I wasn't making a paycheck. And really, anything that I had planned to do with my finances was totally gone. I had $80,000 worth of medical bills and no plans for how to fix anything, right? And sometimes when we're trying to move forward in the present, things are easy and are obvious. We follow this budget. We made this plan for the future, so we're going to follow it. We're going to get to the things that we've planned long term. And sometimes it seems very obvious. But there are other times where things are just quite complicated, where the amount of money going out is way more than the amount that we have coming in, where we see so many problems and obstacles in our way that we just plain don't know what is the most important thing to do next. We don't even know what to do right now to get to a better tomorrow. So, what would God have to say about that? So, we've been talking about the story of the Israelites exiting Egypt, getting freed from slavery in Egypt, and going into the promised land. And God has been giving them all of these hints, all of these promises about what's going to happen when they get to the land, and also been giving them all these ways to live life that will kind of help them and help them with their finances as well. And so that's what we've been kind of looking at these last few weeks. So far, God has reminded them to look at the past, right? He wanted them to remember that they weren't alone, that they had incredible signs of God showing up and being with them in the past, and that they were learning how to trust themselves. And then he encouraged them to have a vision for the future. He said, "What is your long term plan? Let me give you my long term plan for you." He gives them this vision and these promises for what is to come. So then the next step would be, now we're going to enact things in our life today, in the present, to be able to get to this future. And mostly that's going to involve coming down to the right fight, picking the right thing to deal with, the right fight to have right now so that we can get to a better tomorrow. And if you go out of order, if you do the future before the past or what have you, you either end up messing up your finances long term or you end up messing up your relationship with God. So, this is the way that God instructs the Israelites to build their lives in order to build a healthy future kingdom for themselves. And this is what God instructs us to do as Christians as well. So, God promises that when they go in this order, their futures will be successful. So let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verses 11 through 16. It says, "Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, and his decrees that I am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large, and your silver and gold increase, and all you have is multiplied, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. He led you through the vast and dreadful wilderness, that thirsty and waterless land, with its venomous snakes and scorpions. He brought you out of the hard rock. He gave you manna to eat in the wilderness, something your ancestors had never known, to humble you and to test you, so that in the end it might go well with you." So again, God is telling them that there is greatness coming in their future when you get to this place of abundance and a place of betterness. Then this is what you have to watch for. And I think this present section can all be translated to the fight. There's a lot of different things that they have to fight, and we'll talk about that in a second. But part of the way the reason I think about this like this is because this is what I had to change in residency. I had to change the way I was thinking about finances and about what I was fighting for. So, my first tendency, once I got pulled off work, once I had all these bills and all these things, my first tendency was to say, okay, I just need to get more money, right? I just need to go like do something so that more money will come in so I can take care of these problems. So, I tried FMLA, I tried various other endeavors. I even considered leaving medicine entirely. I was actually going to go try out for American Idol, right? Like, I was literally like, clearly, I need some money. Let me just go somewhere. And it looked like the problem was that I didn't have enough money. But the problem was actually bigger than that. It was actually deeper than that. Because really, my problem was that I wasn't really trusting God. If you think about this, if I believe that God is my Father in heaven and He owns the whole world and He loves me and will take care of me, then if a bill comes along that I feel like I can't pay, shouldn't I be able to trust my Father in heaven can handle it? Right? Like if my earthly father, if I knew that he had this enough more than $80,000 to cover this medical bill, if he had that sitting in accounts and he could pay it and would still be fine, I wouldn't have thought twice about it if that had been the plan. So why didn't I see the circumstance the same for my heavenly father? Why didn't I trust that he could take care of something that was bigger than I could? Clearly, I didn't believe and I didn't trust my Heavenly Father was involved like that. I didn't necessarily see Him as a part of my financial story. It was all on my shoulders, it was all on me. And so, part of what I had to do was to fight to kind of reframe the way I was thinking about life and correct my problem with the way I was thinking about my money before we actually corrected the fact that I didn't have any money, right? That's basically how this went down. But we'll come back to that in a second. So anyway, the present circumstances mostly come down to the fight. So this is what we see in the Israelite story as well. So there's four different things that they end up fighting for. So first they fight for their position as child, not slave of God. Then they fight for the land, the calling, the promised land. Then they fight the enemies, right? And then also they fight for obedience, which is what the Bible just said above. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. So, first, fight for your position as child, not slave. Now, this is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, right? We already talked about the importance of the past. So, the Israelites are called out of slavery and into kingship by God. Basically, He does not want them to live the lives they've been living anymore. And as they get ready to go into the land, God is reminding them of all that He's brought them through and all that He's wants them to remember. Remember that God was with them, was still blessing, was still encouraging them, was still on their side. And so even when they go through the desert and there's like bad things coming up and they don't have water and they don't have food and things are looking kind of rough, they're not meant to look at their circumstances to tell whether or not they're in God's will. They're meant to look to God. And so when we learn how to do this in our past, we're learning that we're looking at God to know where we are in our lives. And that is what determines whether we're prosperous, chosen, and blessed. God's say in our life is what determines that, not our circumstances. So then we're able to learn more about ourselves, both our strengths and our weaknesses, and ask God to kind of help us through those to be able to get to where He wants us to. But here's the deal. It's easy to say, like, oh, we just have to learn that God is our father and He cares about us as a father. We're not slaves in His life. But it's a completely different thing to believe that in our lives, right? This sounds like the first step of Christianity, like believe in God and then you move on to other things. But we can't just hear that once and walk it out for the rest of our lives, right? It's a very different thing to pray for a parking spot and see God provide it versus to pray for an $80,000 bill and see God provide it, right? There's a whole lot more faith, required and trust required to get from one to the other. So, this looking at the past, remembering who God is in our lives, is something that you don't just do once. You continually you remind yourself, and you continually go back to the things that God has done in your life, the ways He has showed up, the things He has incredibly done already, to remind you that He's still with you and cares about those circumstances, the things that bother you, bother Him. So we will spend the rest of our lives fighting to believe that God is on our side and that God loves us and that God has good in mind for our futures. And that's okay, right? So what does that look like? Like practically, how do we do that? Well, for me during residency, it was just a lot of reading my Bible, kind of reading scriptures over and over again that said the promises of God, that say God is on our side. And then a lot of just trusting other people's faith, right? Like I ran out of the energy to believe for God to do incredible things. But asking other people to pray for me and asking other people to help me is a lot of how I kind of got through those hard times. And if we can fight to believe that God is on our side, everything else becomes a whole lot easier. So, first, you fight to believe that you are God's, you're God's child. Second, you fight for the land, the calling, the family, the career, the promised land, right? Like this is what God is promising them, the promised land, the land flowing with milk and honey. So the second thing the Israelites have to fight for is they literally have to fight a war. They literally have to go in and take the thing that they've been promised for so long, this land of Israel. They're to take up their swords and literally go in and fight their enemy and go into battle. Now, thankfully, most of the time we are not called into literal battle as Christians nowadays, said thankfully so. But really, what God kind of concentrates on for them is their obedience. When He says go, they should go. And the Israelites get in trouble because God tells them to do things, and either they do it in their own time or they don't really want to, what have you. Really, this is more about obedience. Similarly, God has specific things in mind that we need to obey and specific things that we need to fight for in our own futures. Now, one thing that has gotten really skewed over the last few years is how exactly we're fighting for things. I'm sure by now you've heard of the popularity of the prosperity gospel. And essentially, the prosperity gospel kind of says something like, all you got to do is pray a prayer for prosperity and for good things to happen in your life, and good things will come. Or just recite this verse or recite this thing over and over again, and great things will come in the future, right? It says something along those lines. I've heard it like through things like ask and you shall receive, right? Like that is what the Bible says. The prayer of Jabez, like all of these different things that we did in the last couple of years that have suggested that this is the way that we get to good and healthy financial living. And we don't have time to go through this in real detail today. I'm just going to hit on this. But if you want to go through the full scriptural study of like how I went through this individually with my Bible study on this topic, just stay tuned because I'll tell you how to get access to that. But we'll talk about it in general. Basically, God is really clear about where blessings come from in the Bible, especially when we talk about the story of the Israelites. So in Deuteronomy chapter 8, God clearly tells them that He wants them to be blessed. He wants them to have abundance. Like we were saying earlier, when you get to the land, when you have these great things, when I have blessed you, He wants them to live a different life than what they were living in Egypt. He does not want them to be slaves. He wants them to live an abundant life. And the prosperity gospel, though, kind of skews this a little bit because He also clearly says that they're not going to get there by simple faith or by prayers or by like acting good or like doing something specific. He's asking them to be obedient overall. And we have to remember that the gospel is not a vending machine, okay? Like you don't put in like a coin, put in a little bit and immediately get rewarded with whatever you pick out. That is not what we've signed up for in Christianity, okay? And the prosperity gospel makes it sound like if we just like give this little bit, then we'll get back even greater. If we insert the right action, then we get rewarded for anything in Jesus' name, right? But our relationship with God is not vending machine like faith. This is just plain not how the Bible lays out our relationship with God. And thankfully so, because honestly, if God only answered prayers I had prayed for myself my life would have gone very different. Sometimes I'm thinking way different, way lower, way smaller than God actually is. But if we continue to trust and obey and love God, then He does promise to take care of us, just like adopt us into His family, like and take care of us like a child. And then we get blessings because we're in His family. But we have to be careful that we don't discredit the whole story, right? There's a long list of things that God does bless us with if we're obedient. And if we follow those blessings, if we follow the rules, they have blessings attached to them. But it's not one or the other. It's not, I want to get to this place in my life, therefore I just demand it of God. That's not how we get there. But He has given us the ability to give us abundant prosperity in this life. I love Psalms 27:13. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. So I think the key in rethinking about our money is to understand, again, God was calling the Israelites from slavehood to kingship, from sadness to greatness, from not having anything to having more abundance. But He wasn't calling them to do it without Him or because of some transaction that they had to do. He was calling them to trust Him and to come into the blessings that He had as they came into His family. Okay. And really, what the key is when we're putting God first and glorifying God first, then we get to see everything else that we need added to us. It hinges on not us fighting for money or fighting for to get to a certain place in life or fighting to get to a certain promise or future, but fighting to be with God and to glorify Him. And God gets the glory when the Israelites enter the promised land. So God should get the glory in our lives when we're praying for something and see that come to fruition. So that's a gist of the prosperity gospel. Hope that's clear. So third, we want to fight the enemy's lies. That they are taking back what the enemy stole, right? They have literal people living in the land of Israel that they have to go in and fight. But essentially, God is kind of teaching them how to fight this entire time that they're going through their story. When they are still slaves in Egypt, initially, God does everything for them. All of the promises, all of the miracles, all of the plagues and things like that that get them out of Egypt, that's all God. They don't have to do much of anything. But God doesn't want them living, sitting back watching Him live their lives. He wants them to take ownership and to learn how to fight for themselves. Not so that they can fight without Him, but so that they can fight with Him for the promises that He has coming in the future. And at some point, God passes the authority of the battle onto us. Not all the responsibility, not all the pain, but the ability to go and to choose. He wants us to learn how to trust ourselves, not so that we can get rid of Him, but so that we can fight hand in hand with Him. And sometimes we forget that there's a devil in this world that is really trying to keep us from good things and from God's promises in our life. There's a story. If you've seen the Lord of the Rings, I love the story of Gollum, the guy who wants the little creature who wants the ring. Because especially in the second movie, it does such a good job of showing him fighting with himself. He's fighting with what he believes about what's happening, about the ring, about life. And I think that's such a clear picture of what the devil does to us. Sometimes he just these little questions that he puts in our mind that make us concerned about the future we're aiming for, or make us concerned about the God that we've been following so long, or concerned about the big financial mishaps that come in our way and get in our way. And suddenly, instead of being like faith filled and walking forward and fighting for God's best for us, we're like cowering in fear or totally frozen or totally unsure of what to do at all. So, what does God remind the Israelites to do with this? He actually talks about it the chapter before in Deuteronomy 7. Again, he says, remember what He has already done, all the many steps, the many ways He showed up and showed them that He is number one. He is not afraid of their enemy, not afraid of the devil, not afraid of any other gods that are out there. He is number one in this world. And then two, remember that God is with us, and remember that we are chosen and their enemy is not. Okay. So how does this show up in our finances? So maybe we don't come from riches, and maybe we're constantly putting ourselves down because of it. Like, oh, my family doesn't work like that, or oh, my life is not blessed like that. If you don't get paid much, it doesn't really matter. Sometimes we'll tell ourselves, like, oh, I'm just like a poor person, or like, this is just how it's always got to be. Sometimes we just speak these little things to ourselves that kind of bring us down overall. And we have to recognize and learn that these are not our own little fun things that we're trying to motivate ourselves with. A lot of times, this is the devil kind of just trying to distract us. We have to treat them like they're evil lies from the enemy, not just random ponderings of ourselves, right? We want to fight them like they're our enemy rather than some random thought, right? And if we are chosen and loved and protected by God, and God has good in mind for us and sees us as his children, then we don't need to be afraid of a lack of money or a lack of a job or a lack of our own insecurities or whatever it is that tends to bring us down. We just need to trust God more. And we really need to take these seriously, though, because I think far too often lies will take us out of the battle long before the battle does, right? Lies will take us out, and we will talk ourselves out of being able to do something that we're totally capable of doing. Lies can distract us, divide us from people that we need to walk with. They can delay good things that God has in mind for us. And so we have to fight to hold on to the truth in spite of our enemy. And then last, we have to fight for our obedience. Sometimes what we think is just going to be a fight, like just get out there and slay all the dragons and blah 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 blah. Sometimes we think it's going to look like that in our lives, but mostly what it looks like, especially in our lives today, is obedience. That's literally what it looks like when it's all said and done. And again, we were talking about the prosperity gospel. And so the prayer of Jabez is something that I had gone through with my Bible study recently. And the prayer of Jabez is a really good example of this. Okay. Far too often people don't even notice this statement is there, but it's actually obedience is actually a big part of it. So this is just these two little verses. First Chronicles 4, chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. His mother had named him Jabez, saying, I gave birth to him in pain. Jabez cried out to the God of Israel, Oh, that you would bless me and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm so that I will be free from pain. And God granted his request. Okay, so the second verse is what everyone always concentrates on. They're like, see, Jabez prayed and God answered his prayer. This is all we got to do in our life. We just got to pray and be blessed. And many use this as an example for the prosperity gospel. You can just ask God for whatever you want and you'll get it, right? Like that's what it sounds like is happening here. But whenever that's the interpretation you take of this, you're missing the first verse. You're missing verse 9. So let's read it one more time. Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. What does that mean? What do we learn about Jabez before he prays anything at all? He's honorable. There's a reason that phrase is in the Bible. It's actually, this part of the Bible is literally just a long list of names. It's just a genealogy. And then all of a sudden, we've got way more information about Jabez. And then it moves on to more names. Okay. But there's a reason that that's in there, that he's honorable. Him being honorable or getting what he asked for, it didn't come down to him self-proclaiming and being so confident or like saying the right things or having faith in himself. It came down to the fact that he was obedient and obeying the things that God has taught him. He was obedient to the rules and the laws and the boundaries that God had given him in his life. And this is, I think, the key to why God even answers his prayer. Our obedience does have some bearing on our blessings in life, but not on our standing with God. And we have to keep that in mind. We see this clearly in every story in the Bible, right? Especially like with the Israelites. God chose them before they did a dang thing. And then he tells them what they need to do to obey, and then they get blessings, right? The same with Jabez. There first comes the obedience, and then comes the blessings. The same with David and Solomon. The same with all kinds of stories in the Bible. God blesses those who are walking with him and obeying him before they even need any money or ask for anything at all. So sometimes the present is not fun. The present is the desert. The present is the hard part where God is trying to force us to trust in him more, to see him more, to believe him more. It's not the promised land living of greatness. The present is often the struggle, not the reward. And it's easy to get lost in the present. It's easy to get lost in this part where we're so concerned about the circumstances or the economy or our job or what have you that we just forget that God has great things in mind and that God is not leaving us hanging here. It's we're not stuck here in the badness for forever. And the thing to keep in mind is God tells the Israelites, he doesn't ever tell them to concentrate on the present. He doesn't ever say, make sure that you're really paying attention to all the bad things that are happening right now, right? He's either telling them to look at the past or telling them to look at the future, right? Right? He doesn't need them obsessed with the fact that they're slaves in Egypt. He doesn't need them obsessed with the fact that they're wandering in the desert. He doesn't need them obsessed with the battle and overwhelmed with the things that they've lost. He needs them to believe the big picture and believe him, believe that he's taking them from here to there, and that is the overall goal. They need to concentrate on what God promises and what will come in the future, because the present can break us down, but not if we're looking at God instead of what we can see in front of us. And the same ended up being true for me during my internship, right? It took some time for me to kind of stop complaining and stop feeling sorry for myself. It took a long time, let's be real. I had negative money, right? Like I had a lot of leftover problems that took a while to get through. But I didn't have to fight for more money. I had to fight to believe that God was still on my side. And the more I fought for that, and the more that I had people praying for me and believing for me when I didn't have the faith to believe myself, God started fixing all the bad parts that I couldn't handle. So I was granted a small stipend to help with paying expenses while I wasn't working. And then I was granted the ability to start working, even with accommodations. They just kind of helped watch me very closely. Then, incredibly enough, I had what was called a catastrophic medical insurance policy. Basically, if something horrible happens, it'll step in and help you out. That the medical insurance, the medical school had that policy for me even after I had graduated. And that kicked in and took me down from about $80,000 of bills to about $10,000. I focused on God and God took care of me, right? He took care of those things that seemed so overwhelming that I was never going to make it through. And he got me to a better place where I could see that he was going to continue to show up and continue to bless me and continue to walk with me no matter what. So, how do we change our mindset like that? How do we learn from the Israelites and learn from my story? Well, first, we identify the lies we've been struggling with. And then we believe God. And third, we obey. Those are the three main things that we have to concentrate on. So, for the Israelites, we see they have to identify the lie. They have to stop seeing themselves as slaves being mistreated. It's not where they live anymore. They have to see themselves as children of God. They have to believe God. They have to build up faith. And faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. And so this daily decision to go pick up their manna, to go pray to God, to go believe him one more time, all of these different things add up to them having faith to be able to walk out the next steps. And then they have to obey. They can't just sit around and wait for God to do everything for them. When God tells them to go, they have to go and they have to move forward in faith. So, what about for you? What is it that you need to kind of work on in your life to move from wherever you are into more godly financial success? Are you getting tripped up thinking that God doesn't have like a happy and healthy future for you? Are you getting tripped up about lies about yourself or about God and about how he shows up in our financial lives? Are you getting tripped up by not obeying the simple things you need to do, like budget, get accountability, do something very simple and very small and stay focused on it? What is it exactly that's kind of tripping you up and how can we get you to a better, successful future? So today I'm offering you a chance to kind of rewrite your finances based on God's strength, not just your own, right? I think that's so much of what both of these stories show us, that God cares about the things that matter to us and has a better life in mind for us. So I'm offering you someone to stand with. If you're struggling with financial setbacks or really kind of trying to get a better grasp on trusting God for your future, you're going to need some support to stand with. So come stand on my faith. Come kind of partner with me, the same faith that got me through brain damage, through financial mishap, and into walking now as a faith-filled Christian who is actually building and growing for the future well. So let me help you see the wonder-working ability of a God and how he blesses and loves those as we walk with him, not in spite of us, but with us. So I've got a financial app. It's a month-long program. It's got basically a 5-minute daily video that you kind of go through, answer the questions, and work through. And it'll kind of help you get to a new way of thinking about yourself and about thinking about your finances. And so that's available. Just go to wherever you get your apps on the App Store, and it's called Healing Medicine. And you can kind of download that today and take a look at it. And so I will try and put the link down in this video as well. I think I figured out how to do that. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great evening, great weekend. And we will see you next week for the last part of the lesson, walking in our godly inheritance and what it looks like to walk out our financial, once we get to a better place financially, what it looks like to walk with God hand in hand to do that and walk in a godly inheritance. So hope to see you then. Have a good one.